with that, our First Lady Lobie Stone and Professor Stacy Lotz.
Well, thank you all for coming. We have just such a great weekend going on here, and the weather has just cooperated unbelievably. Clarence and I just got back 2 days ago from London and Germany, where the weather didn't always cooperate like this, but we had a great trip. Well, I was asked to speak just a little bit about how art has impacted my life. I can't talk about art without talking about my mother. I was born in Paducah, Kentucky. Grew up in Paducah, Kentucky, and which is where the Ohio River and the Tennessee come together, and it's just below the Mason-Dixon line. I wasn't in the Midwest, but I could see it across the river in Illinois. And I was lucky, so lucky to be born into a family who had a more global view, I guess. My mother, I don't know where she came from in terms of her view of art and the arts and how it impacted our lives. She grew up in an even smaller town, Madisonville, Kentucky, but she was born with a love of the arts. And this is my mother, right here. I call her my Picasso mama, right there. And that was done by one of her art professors. And this is one of her paintings, one of my favorite paintings. So I grew up with a mother who didn't allow coloring books. We were never allowed to color inside the lines. We had big pads of newsprint paper. We had a whole room in our house devoted strictly to art, and we had rooms for many other things too. My brothers bred white rats in the basement, I think, and all sorts of weird things went on in our house. I'm one of 5 kids. But I was lucky that Mother brought us up also, taking us to art museums in Chicago and St. Louis and Nashville and New York. And my favorite story about my mother is that she would pull her car over on the side of the road, make us all get out of the car, and she would do like this and frame the view for us. So she taught us how to see. She taught us to look at all the colors of green in a tree. What do you see out there? How many colors of green? What do you see? The silver? Look how when the wind blows through the leaves, they turn upside down and there's silver on the bottom. What color is the trunk of that tree? No, it's not brown. Don't you see the purple? Don't you see the gray? Don't you see the brown? Don't you see a little bit of blue over there? And so later, as I went on to art museums, and I saw Cézanne's colors of trees, Chagall's colors, Degas. I mean, so many people who saw those colors that my mother saw in her head and put them up to paper and to canvas. And so art for me, what is art in my life? Art is everything in my life. And art is not separate from life. Art is everywhere you look. If you are fortunate to have been taught how to see. And I mentioned that we were just in London. We went to the National Gallery one day, and I thought I'd seen every Degas ever painted, at least in a book. And there was a painting about this big that was done in colors I'd never seen him paint before. Oranges and corals and salmons and blues, and Clarence had to literally get the hook and pull me away. I was just entranced. I was just mesmerized. So I think of how art has provided for me in my life I lose my words here, but a sanctuary, for one thing. It is my chapel to be able to go to a great art museum and to see the expression and the language that the great painters have used in their lives. And it's not just the great painters, but art has been, in the world, the first means of communication. Way before we had written language, probably before we had spoken language, we had art. And you think about the wonderful cave paintings in southwest of France and the southeastern part of France both that were discovered years ago, that were, I think, 17,000, 18,000 years old, and that was the first means of communication. I've been fascinated. Clarence said to me this morning, don't forget to talk about this because this is something I'm really passionate about. One of my earliest memories, I probably was 4 or 5 years old. I can still still see it just as clearly as if it were yesterday. Sitting on the floor in my grandparents' house at Kentucky Lake, looking at National Geographic and seeing Maasai warriors in Africa with their amazing red cloths wrapped around their bodies and their amazing beads and earrings and the decorative ways that in the most primitive cultures throughout the world, you cannot kill the art spirit. It is deep within all of us. And you think about in the most primitive cultures in deepest Africa, and in early Greece, centuries BC, you have pottery and the way they decorated their pottery, their items of everyday use, and how they learned to make colors from insects, you know, from plants, from flowers, from tree bark, from mud. I brought home from Africa years ago mud cloth that was just so gorgeous. And a few years ago, upholstered a little chair in African mud cloth, and it's one of my favorite things that we have. You all may know that, reading Clarence's biography, that we did a Fulbright in Hanoi for 6 months, which at times seemed like 10 years. But I always said that just when I thought I cannot take one more day of some of the things that made it difficult to be there, I would turn the corner and see a centuries-old temple that would take your breath away. To be able to travel to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat, and see the carvings that were, how old, Clarence, 2,000 years old? Something like that, maybe older. Just amazing how the spirit of art has lived on from earliest times. And in times of oppression, people have expressed themselves through art. So those are the ways that I have been affected by it in my life. Although I did do a B.F.A, I studied art, I did go on to have a business career because I had this, I was talking about this earlier with Lila and Harlow, I had this left brain, right brain thing going. I had my mother as a painter and my father as a president of a barge line, and I loved both sides of it. But I later translated that into my career as an interior designer, because all the things that you learn from art, from studio art, from making art, and from all the art history courses I took, that translates into your everyday life. All the things that you learn in art about composition, volume, light, color, what am I forgetting?
You're doing fine.
It all translates into what I've done in my homes and in other people's homes, and in dentist offices I've done, brokers' offices I've done, and so forth. All those elements are there. And all those elements are there when you dress yourself in the morning, when you set a table, when you pick out the textiles that you're going to use in your home, which is another thing. That's another weaving. Oh my gosh, the weaving that you find in indigenous cultures throughout the world, the colors that they have chosen to put together are fearless. And there was an article written in a magazine in San Antonio about my house as a designer. It was in HGTV, and there was a little article written about it, and the bold headline was, Lobie Stone says, "Be fearless with color." I thought, well, you know, I did say that, and I do believe that. Be fearless with color. You know, because color is also life. How dreary would it be if we all lived in a brown world? You know, I've been lucky to deep sea dive, to dive to 100 feet, and to do night dives with light, and to see the colors in nature. Under the sea, so far under the sea, when you put that light on coral, on fish, and we see it for inspiration in birds and butterflies and flowers, in so many places. So I think that one of the things that I talk to students about when I talk to them, especially young women, is about opening your eyes and looking around, and allow yourself to enjoy the color that you find in your everyday world. and the way colors vibrate next to each other. You know, the tension that can set up between colors and between space and between negative space. All of those things that you love and enjoy in nature, you may not even know why, and you don't have to know why. And that's what I also have talked about in interior design and in architecture. A good designer, a good architect makes you feel comfortable in a space without you knowing why. You don't need to know why. But when you walk into most cathedrals, you'll walk into a lower space, an anteroom first, and then it opens up into a broad space, and so you feel expansive. And what happened in our days of awful mansions, and believe me, I saw plenty of them in Houston, is you would walk into a two-story opening, and then you go into a, you know, compressed space. After that, it's backwards. What are they thinking? You know, you want to have art and design and architecture expand your life, you know, open your life, and open your eyes, and enjoy this beautiful world, the man-made and the nature-made parts of it as well. So that's kind of my take on how it's affected my life. And here's my kindred spirit, Stacy, which is the other thing with art. You find your tribe. You know, here's my tribe.
Thank you. Listening to Lobie talk, so the things that she was talking about that had inspired her, like walking into a cathedral or walking into museums, I came to making art and then to teaching art in a very different way. I am a true Midwesterner. I grew up in Galesburg, 13 miles from here. The odds of me finding a teaching position in my home, very, very rare. And I feel very, very fortunate. But the things that have inspired me were not cathedrals, were not museums, but were cornfields, were bean fields, were the neighbor who built motorcycles that when I was a little kid, I would go to the garage with him and help, hand the screwdriver. What are you doing there? Look at things. I had no idea what he was doing, but I like to kind of mess around with things, helping my dad in the garage. And then I was very fortunate in high school to have an art teacher who had your experiences, and he shared those with me. And I used to go to his house after school, and he said, "Oh, I'll teach you how to weld. I'm working on a piece." He did a lot of commissions in the surrounding area, a lot of church commissions, and big steel pieces, Virgin Marys, and a lot of kind of outdoor commission pieces as well. And so I went and started helping him kind of as an apprentice when I was a high school student. And when he worked, this was a lumbering man, his name was Jimmy Crown, who looked like Pavarotti, sang like Pavarotti. It was always big. Everything was big with him. And I would go to the garage to help him after school and on weekends. And he was playing Pavarotti, and he was singing, and he would say, "Stacy, come into the space. We've got to make art now." And I'm, okay, what do you want me to do? And, you know, I was the student at school who was not going to go to college, because what was I going to do? I had no idea what I was going to do. And when it came time for me to graduate, Mr. Crown said, "Stacy, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "You're going to college, right?" And I said, "Well, I don't think so." My parents were not in a position to pay for me to go to school. My parents did not go to college, so I'm a first-generation student. They knew nothing about what that meant for me to go to college. And he said, "You're going to college." And I said, "But what will I do there?" And he said, "You stupid girl, you're going to make art." And then he said, "And when you're done doing that, or in the midst of doing that, you're going to teach, because that's what you do. That's who you are." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Really?" I mean, you know, I was 17. You know, I was I am empathetic with our students that come in and say they don't know what they're gonna do, because I see myself in that. But in the time that I would spend with him working, one of the things, and I think this relates to what you were talking about, this idea of someone nurturing, someone telling you about art. What I learned from him, sitting on his patio, sitting in his garage, helping him work, you know, we could be working and he'd say, stop. Do you hear that? And it would be a wren out in the yard. And he'd say, put your things down. Let's go to the yard. And we'd go to the yard, and we'd stand out there, and I'd be standing there looking around, and he'd say, shh. If we're quiet, we'll be able to see. And then all of a sudden, this little bird, wren, you know, or some other bird that was in his backyard would fly by and say, oh, that's it. That's it. That's the art. That's the art that I know. Right? So that's the kind of thing that inspires me. And so when Hannah introduced us and she said, you know, that I make art about everyday things, I make art about stories. I walk into a cornfield and have that experience that you do in a cathedral. I get in the middle of a cornfield. I was a detasseler. Some of you in the audience know this. I detasseled for DeKalb for 5 summers. It was one of my all-time favorite jobs, just second to teaching at Monmouth College. And that is true. I love that job. I love that job because there was something about that. It was the go to work, accomplish something, go home. Right? Job done. I got all the tassels off of every one of those stalks in 5 fields, you know, in a day, or wherever we might have been working. But I had never really been in the middle of a cornfield. I mean, I grew up in Galesburg, but I'm not a farmer, you know, so I didn't know anything about really what that meant. But one of the first times that I was actually in the middle of a field, and the corn was much lower, it got low because there was a lot of water standing, and so there were what they call greenies, little stalks that never get above knee high, they never do anything, and they're lime green. You want to talk about some color. They're lime green against the blackest dirt you can imagine. So here I am in the middle of a field, it's 100 degrees, and I'm having an epiphany about color and soil and a smell, and all of a sudden, because it's low, and I look up, there's this giant sky. That's my cathedral, right? So I think one of the things that I tell students, and because we teach students who aren't necessarily going to be art majors, you know, every student at Monmouth has to take a fine arts course, whether it be in theater, music, or in art. And so they all choose the thing that they want to go to. And I think that the ones who aren't going to be art majors are the most important ones to reach. They're the most important ones to reach. Because these are the folks, right, who have to leave college, go into the world, and I want them to see the world in a different way. And I tell them, it doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter where you're at. Think about the things that you are encountering. The colors, the smells,
The light.
the space, the light. These are the things, right, that keep us human. These are the things that bring us joy. It's why people go to the Grand Canyon and stand at the rail and go, but they don't know why.
They don't know why.
It's beautiful, but they don't know why. I mean, but instinct tells us why. And it's why we go, oh. It's why we go on vacation and take 1,000 pictures of a sunset when we're at the ocean. And you get the pictures back and you go, this doesn't really seem like what I experienced when I was there, right? It doesn't. It never captures it. But there's something about that moment. And so for me, what I want students to do is to understand that every moment they're in has the possibility to be something really magnificent. Even if it's some kind of strange, quirky thing. Which is why I ask students, too, to make art about the things that they know. Because they always say, I don't know what to do. What do you want me to do? Just tell me what to do. And I say, I can't tell you what to do. What do you know about? And the first thing they say is, nothing. And I say, you know about something. You definitely know about something. What is the something you know about? Where do you work in the summertime? Oh, I work at McDonald's. Let's make some money about working at McDonald's. No, nobody wants to know about that. And I said, people that don't work at McDonald's might want to know about that. And it might be a really interesting body of work. It's your experience. Own that experience. They might not have big experiences like traveling the world or doing things that, you know, some of us might get to do, but I want them to appreciate then whatever experiences they have.
Well, every experience can be a big experience.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be on the other side of the world.
Absolutely.
Experience.
And that's what I want, you know, that's I think one of the things we try to instill in the students who come through the art department. And I think that music and theater would say the same things. You know, we're trying to build an appreciation for the things that are around us that maybe we take for granted sometimes, that can be pretty darn spectacular. The things that keep us human. The things that keep us human. That's
True. It is true. It's big. And that teach us how to think in a different way, so that when I think of, this all goes back to also the liberal arts and the liberating arts, as Clarence says, and the experience of the whole point of life is more than just a linear education about how to take, for instance, and I hope there aren't any engineers in here that are supposed to.
I bet there are at least 3.
But you know, if you only take engineering, if you only take pre-med, if you only take a very narrow view of the world, you're most likely to be a linear thinker, you know, instead of a bigger thinker, a more critical thinker.
Yeah. And what's always interesting about students is that whether I have them in a sculpture class or whether I might have them in an art history class or I teach an integrated studies course to a citizenship course where we look at artwork, it never fails that a student several years down the road sends an email, sends a text message to me, hey, I was at X place and I saw this thing and it made me think of that conversation we had one day in class, and I got it. I saw it and I got it. And it's like, you know what? That's it. That's my goal. That's my goal, right? Is so that people go out into the world and they get excited when they see things. And you know, it's I have like the best job in the world. You know, I have a really fantastic job. I get to work with young people. I get to share my passion. And you know, I do that in all different kinds of ways, and the students think I'm really goofy, and in class I'm pretty darn goofy in class. Because I get really excited about things like hose clamps, and screwdrivers, and tape measures, and we went on a field trip last fall. I took my I have a construction and foundry class. And for those of you that may not know, we have a foundry in the art department, so we pour bronze and we pour aluminum. And we use all the same kinds of chemicals and the same sands and resin-bonded sands to make our molds that they do in big industry. And so we had a student last year that she told me kind of out of nowhere, she's like, oh yeah, you know, my dad, he works over at the foundry in Caterpillar. And I said, huh? And she said, yeah. And I said, we're taking a field trip. We're going on a field trip. And she said, yeah, but nobody will want to go to that. And I said, oh, yes, they will. She's like, you're the only one that wants to go to the Caterpillar Foundry. And I said, no, we're all going. So we called, we made an appointment over at CAT at the foundry, and we were there about 5 hours. And it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And what was really great, though, for the students is that they were able to see, we saw them pour the day we were there, a locomotive engine as big as this room. With these giant crucibles that came across on I-beams. I mean, these crucibles were probably half the size of this room. They're hanging. The iron is being pushed into the crucible with a locomotive engine, with like a blade on the front that pushed the iron down into the crucible for it to melt, and then it rolls across this conveyor belt and pours in. And so we see this locomotive engine, and then they take us to where there's one that's complete. And I said, see you guys, this is what we're gonna do. And they said, our molds are that big. We're making shoes, our molds look like shoe boxes. And I said, yeah, but they use the same sand, the same chemicals, same process. They did all the same stuff that we did. We're just going to apply it to a different thing now. And so, you know, I try to get students out to see, like, the things that we do in art all come from industry as well, right? So I mean, it all relates to everything that you do. And so making those connections of how art is made and how we as consumers come in contact with it, I think is really important. We make a lot of stuff out of corrugated board, cardboard. And there's a cardboard factory in Galesburg. And yes, we have been to the cardboard factory for a tour. And we learned that it's not called cardboard there, it's called corrugated board. And there is a difference. And they were very nice to us over there. They give us hats and vests, and we come back, and I see students walking around campus in their West Rock corrugated board hats, and they see me and they go, "Look, Stacy, I'm wearing my hat." Yes, you are. So, I mean, I think understanding how artists work, where they get inspiration, you know, it can come from many, many different places. And I always want students to know that there's not a wrong place for inspiration to come from. Whatever the place is, it's theirs, and they should own it. And I think, you know, I want students to have fun.
Well, and art is everywhere.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun, right? If you let it be fun. So I think that's kind of, and I think that the department, all of us in the art department, kind of push that way. Some of us lean more towards serious things, and you know, we joke that it's jokes and fun in the basement, in the sculpture room. But lo and behold, things are really happening down there when we're having fun too. So, yeah. And here I am, 21 years later. Probably another 20 to go. I don't know. Harlow, how many years were you here? 40. I don't know if I can beat Harlow. I don't know if I can beat Harlow. While I have your attention, I should just point out, Lobie pointed out the two pieces that were her mother's. And just so that you know, the ceramic pieces that are sitting on the pedestals at the side, those are from an alum, Gary Karstens. And Gary went on to be a potter. Those are wood-fired pieces. He came back to the school and did a workshop a couple of years ago with our students, and was very gracious. He said, you know, I don't have a whole lot of money I can leave you, but I'd like to do something, and I'd like to leave these pieces for the collection. So they're out on display now for this show, so we're really happy about that. And the two pieces on the back wall are from a recent alum, Jessica Bingham, who just got her M.F.A. From Bradley University, and she's actually going to come back and teach a class with us in the fall. So we're pretty excited about that. And her work looks nothing like this now. It's a whole different thing. She's turning into a sculptor. I told her at her exhibition, I said, I knew it. I knew you had it in you. You're just waiting. You're just waiting to become a sculptor. And then the piece here, this landscape piece, this is a piece of George Waltershausen's, who was the sculpture professor before me. And I have really big shoes to fill coming in after George. George was here, I think, 37 years, 36 years, something like that. Close to that. And I keep in contact with George. And when I first started here, actually, when we would get our foundry materials over at the aluminum castings in Galesburg, when I would go to the foundry to pick stuff up, they called me the little W. They said, "Oh, you're the little W." And I said, well, "I'll take that as a compliment." And then it was a huge compliment. George is wonderful, wonderful. So, do you have questions for Lobie and me?
Where is the art department? It was at Nichols Hatchery when we were here. You said,
We've moved out of the hatchery.
you said basement, it's in the basement?
It's in the basement of McMichael Academic, what used to be the science building, many years ago. Many years ago. Yeah. And they at one point they were going to come in and they were going to replace the sinks in the sculpture rooms. I have 2 rooms in the basement, and ceramics is then on the other end of the hallway in the basement. And they were going to come in and replace the sinks, and I said, you can't replace those sinks. They're big, heavy-duty, like thick lead sinks from when it was a science building, the original sinks. They're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. But everybody, when the plumber comes in, he says, oh my God, we really should replace these things. I said, don't touch those things. They are, they're beautiful pieces, they're sculptured. Yeah, I love that. I love them. What other questions do you have for Lobie?
When you sculpt, is your work abstract or concrete?
It's both. It's both. Some of the most recent work that I did was very, as you would say, concrete. Robins, big robins. And they look like robins. But then I also made some abstract robins too, that you would look at and go, what are those orange things? Those are robins. Same thing. I find that the more I work, I do a lot of welding, and the more that I work, I think the more minimal that my work tends to be. But I love materials. I mean, as an artist, you love materials, any materials you can get a hold of. I can't, Lowe's, Menards, hardware stores, I could be in there for days looking at nuts and bolts, right? What could I do with these nuts and bolts? I need a pound of these at least, right? And so I collect materials a lot first, and then I hoard them for sometimes years before anything happens with them. And then I'll lo and behold, hey, I've got an idea. Here's what I'm going to do with that. So just kind of depends on what the pieces are. But I've made art out of bread wrappers too. Giant bales of hay, round bales out of bread wrappers.
Does anybody use 3D printer?
We have 2 3D printers actually in the theater department. They just got a new one that is very spiffy, and I've been talking to Doug Rankin. I said, Doug, you need to share that. I'd like to come over and see what that's all about. He said, absolutely, of course you should come over and see it. And I think that there's a 3D printer also in the physics department. And we do a lot of collaborative work with other departments. I get a lot of physics students in sculpture. And I get a lot of physics students that just come over, they want to make a mold because they want to pour a resin and they want to do this. And they were trying to make wings for a drone last fall. And the young man that came to me, he's like, so Professor Fasano said I should see you about making some wings for the drone. And I said, well, do you have a drawing? Well, no. I said, how big do they need to be? Well, I don't know. I said, how thick do they need to be? Well, I don't know. What do we need to make them out of? Well, I think some kind of a resin. And I said, okay, well, we're going to have to make a mold. But I said, let's do a test run on a small piece, like a little tiny piece. So we start making the mold, and he says, that's good enough. That'll be good enough. And I said, you're making a wing for a drone. It has to be perfect. I said, the mold has to be perfect. He said, that's good enough. And I said, when you're doing science, is that how you come to an end result? That's good enough. He looked at me, he was mortified that I said that. He goes, no, we never do that. And I said, then why would you think I would do that? It's got to be perfect. And I had a wonderful working relationship with that young man. He'll probably never take an art class. We worked all semester. We were not successful in creating a mold for a wing, but we tried some stuff. You know that great stuff? It's called great stuff that you spray insulation. It's a foam, and you spray it out of a can, and it gets huge, and it gets really hard. It gets really hard. Yeah, Harlow's made art out of it. We sprayed that in a mold, and it blew our mold up. It got so hot in there, and the mold just went poof. And I said, Scott, you're the physics guy. Why didn't you know that was going to happen? He said, I don't know, that was really cool. Let's do it again. We spent all semester kind of going back and forth with things that never worked, but we had a lot of fun doing it, and I built a really great relationship with this young man, and that's the best part about teaching, right? And I don't think, I called Fasano and I said, I don't think Scott's going to get his wing for his drawing. And he said, Stacy, it doesn't matter. I really just wanted him to experiment. And I said, well, we did some experimenting. I said, did you hear about the exploding mold. Anyway.
That would have been a great video, actually.
Oh, I know. What other things, you guys?
I would like Lobie to comment on that painting that you said was your favorite.
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's one of my favorites. This is, my mother, there's so much in this painting to me. And I do love abstract art. I mean, I talked about some of the impressionists that I love, but I love abstract art. And there are always so many layers and so much depth, and this painting to me has all the same components that a great realism painting would have. It still has composition, it has depth, it has contrast, it has volume, it draws you in, you know, and I love the contrast between the colors. These are some of my favorite colors. I love black. As a designer, I always put a little bit of black in every room, whether it's a table, whether it's something in a frame, whether it's a sculpture, because black sort of anchors you and gives you something to work against and to vibrate against. And I love all of these coral colors, and you know, it's also like lying on your back in the yard as a kid looking at the clouds. You know, you can make anything out of it that you want it to be. And she did a whole series of these. Another thing that I talk about when I talk to the young women on campus is about I usually talk about women in art, because as Stacy knows, and I'm certainly not an art history teacher, but probably 98% of all the artists that you would study if you took an art history course are men. Do we honestly think that women were not making art? Mary Cassatt was the only woman in the Impressionists. She was an American woman, actually, that was painting in Paris at the same time, and was the only woman to be exhibited along with the Impressionists in Paris. We have Lee Krasner, who was in the shadow of her husband, Jackson Pollock. We have Joan Mitchell. Gosh, you can name on one hand. Who am I forgetting? Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo, of course. She's fabulous. I lived in Texas for 25 years. Louise Nevelson. I spent, yeah, George O'Keeffe. I spent a day as an art student with Louise Nevelson in Minneapolis, which was incredible. Talk about big. She was a big personality and so talented. And she used, like Stacy, she used everyday materials. She used wood, and it was always black or always white. And she just made such a big impact on me as a young art student. But my mother was painting at a time when, in Paducah, Kentucky, in the 50s and 60s, I was the only one that I knew who had a mother who worked. All the other mothers were housewives, and my mother, of course, was that too. But when we came home at the end of the day, she was in the studio. And my earliest aromatic impressions are linseed oil and turpentine and oil paint. And that's like perfume to me, even today. And when we came for our, what Clarence calls the audition, 2 years ago, the very first building I went into was the art building. And I walked in and I went, oh, it smells so good in here. But my mother was unusual for her time, and this really is what she looked like. Now, I don't know what he was imagining here, but my mother, believe it or not, had thick, straight, jet black hair. And she was so glamorous and so unusual for her time and her place. But I was also a daddy's girl. I was such a daddy's girl that I almost missed the importance of my mother in my life. And she died in 2000. She exhibited in Paris in 1976 in the big, what was it called, bicentennial celebration of Americans in Paris. And that was really fun. So she did landscapes beautifully. She did portraits. She did still lifes. She did everything, as you know. And you know, she loved abstract art, and I love abstract art. But it's just like say, Olympic figure skater has to do the exercises first before they can do the other powerful artistic creative things that they do. And so she could do it all. So I don't know if that tells you anything, sort of went off on a whole nother riff, but I love that painting. We have two of them at Quimby House, one stacked over the other in the living room, and they always just pull me in and make me smile. Fred?
Well, a question, a comment for those of you who are going to the dinners tonight. When you're over by Quimby, go inside and take a look, and you'll see some real architectural art. I think that Lobie just did a fantastic
Oh,
job
thank you.
pulling that together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it was really fun. That house is an amazing house. I am a historic preservationist. I had the great fortune to grow up in a revival house in Paducah that was built in 1903 with high ceilings and inlaid floors and just a beautiful, beautiful space. And then after college, I lived in New Orleans in the French Quarter for 8 years, walked to work every day, and lived in a building right on Jackson Square that was amazing. It only had a living room, a bedroom that faced the courtyard, and then a tiny kitchen that was about as big as these two chairs. And that's, who needs a kitchen in New Orleans after that? And I painted it, I was just talking to Clarence about this the other day because we saw a painting in a gallery in London of crabs, and the crab claws that are this gorgeous blue. And I remember mixing my own paint for that room, and I painted it all in enamel of this beautiful turquoisey Louisiana crab claw blue. Ceiling, walls, cabinets, stove, refrigerator. I lost my security deposit on that part. But it was really great. So to have the pleasure and the opportunity of taking Quimby House, which was built in 1867, in the college, it was donated to the college in 1965. It's an Italian-made house. A lot of people think it's Victorian, but it's not. It did have a Victorian porch added in the late 1880s, and the bay windows that are on the south side of the house were added at the same time. But the first thing I did when I went into that house was rip down all those Victorian heavy drapes that were everywhere. It was so dark and dreary in the house, and all the walls were painted in really dark colors. And I thought, I will slit my wrist if I have to live in this dark space. And there was so much beauty there that was hidden. So we did take that down, and we were able to, with our wonderful painters and carpenters, do some basic things to give it a little love. And then we had a trustee who handed Clarence a check a few months ago and said, this is for Lobie to do whatever she needs to do on the inside of the house. And I was just like, oh my God. Well, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, which was the back part of the house. Well, first of all, there was a tiny kitchen, very dark, very difficult to work in, and we do a lot of receptions and entertaining at the house. I love to have students over for what we call lunches with Lobie.
And they love to go there.
Oh, thank you.
They love it.
We have so much fun. We bring out all of the dragon plates that we brought home from Vietnam, and my grandmother's silver, and all the great glasses that we brought back from all our various travels, and sit down and have a lunch, and we talk and listen and trade stories, and it's really great fun. But so we opened the kitchen up to that veranda that became euphemistically called a 3-season porch that was actually a 1-season porch because it had no AC, no heat, no venting, but it was the only room in the whole house that has windows that open. So we took that wall down and opened that up, and we have a real functioning kitchen and living space back there. So it's great for the receptions that we do, and our food service people love cooking in there now, so it's really been great. And one of the things that my mother taught me was always leave a place better than you found it. So if I do nothing else here, hopefully we will have left Quimby House better than we found it. And we had such a great palette, with such great blank canvas to work with. So we love having you all over there tonight. I hope you'll all come for the first part of the progressive dinner tonight. I think it starts at
Now, 6.